that article, that interview, put me on the map. Up until then, I was not considered to be a serious candidate because the mainstream media ignored me with the sole exemption of Don Lagana.
Murray, careful. I think we might be sending over.
It's okay. I don't care.
Carrie,
but I'm just saying, Don Lagana, when he interviewed me, he did it tongue in cheek as if it was a joke.
Carrie, are we live?
I said when Don Lagana began the interview, he treated it tongue in cheek as if it was a joke.
Live.
Okay, we're live. We need to get Chuck back, but let me welcome everyone to tonight's special broadcast of Better Savannah. I'm filling in for Chuck Fagan. Our special guest tonight is Murray Silver, mayoral candidate in 2015, a good friend, a great thinker, and I like to think of him as our own Anthony Bourdain right here in Savannah. Chuck Fagan will be rejoining us momentarily. The nice young lady at the bottom of your screens is Carrie Smith. She is now working a little bit with Better Savannah to assist us in development projects, open records requests, research, and overall assistance. So anyway, that's we apologize for the delay tonight. We had Zoom software update issues and Facebook Live issues, but we're glad that you're here. So let me start by saying that back in the early 2000s, when I was a Greene County Commissioner, and the Savannah Morning News blog was the only place for interesting conversation. Most everyone had made up screen names at that time. Mine was Oh Yeah, and Murray Silver's was Midtown Mojo, but we didn't know one another at that point in time. But I'll tell you, I loved what Midtown Mojo had to say. It was always crisp, articulate, and always on point. And whoever was behind Midtown Mojo, I agreed with, liked them because they not only liked what I said, but they challenged me, and we dialogued. So 15 years later, in 2015, when Murray ran for mayor, we connected the dots, and Oh Yeah and Midtown Mojo met officially for the first time. So welcome, Murray.
Thanks, John. It is nice to hear your reassuring voice in these troubled times.
Well, thank you.
You have been a constant in Savannah, Georgia for more than 15 years. There aren't many people who can say that. There aren't many people who would assume that position, but I am grateful for everything that you do, whether I agree with you or not.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Murray. Let's go to my questions. And the first one, Murray, is in this last city election, except for Van and Estella Shabazz, the whole city council got voted out. Murray, what in the world, what in the hell happened? What's your take on that 2019 pivotal city election?
Well, you'd have to go back to 2015 when I challenged Edna Jackson. It sent shockwaves through the Black community of Savannah because they were under the impression that once Black elected officials were in place, they could not be taken out by any white person because they simply didn't have the votes. It was unthinkable. And in fact, when I spent an entire year running for mayor, and for most of that year, nobody paid me any attention because they didn't think I had a chance in hell. And so, however, the fact that Edna Jackson was defeated sent shockwaves through the city because it showed that Savannah was prepared to accept the fact that we were moving towards what I call a post-racial Savannah. And by that, I mean, when I was running for mayor, I said that I thought it was time for a mayor to come along that could represent Black Savannah and white Savannah, old and new, rich and poor. And I thought that I was perfectly positioned to be the first post-racial mayor. And so those seeds were planted back in 2015. And the situation was that the city council back then was drawn, they had battle lines, it was divided in half. No one in Savannah appreciated that. And so a lot of the people that ran the same year that I did and lost, they ran again and won. And the disappointing thing to me, John, is that we seem to have replaced that old city council with their duplicate. It's split right in half again. And I don't see that we've made any progress in this new election. What do you think?
Yeah, things have shifted. I think you're on point on that. And I just can't remember, Murray, in the almost 30 years that I've lived here, such a sweeping change on city council. I forget how many seats turned over in your election in 2015, but I think a lot of it had to do with the Deloach administration, which was patently not hiding who they favored and what they wanted to accomplish. It was so wildly pro tourism and hospitality. It was kind of easy to, pick at them and frame them up as being asleep and missing, the rest of the city didn't seem to get much attention. But
well, John, I will tell you something that I have never said publicly, which I think will be interesting, especially now that it's 6 years down the road, and it's not going to hurt anybody's feelings. Eddie Deloach jumped into the race at the very last minute.
I remember.
And the day that Eddie Deloach announced, I ran into him in Johnny Harris restaurant. I did not know the man. And he came up to me and he introduced himself and he said, I'm running for mayor. I said, since when? He said, since today. I said, why? He said, well, look, he said, I don't want to be mayor. I don't have time to be mayor, but they're making me run because you've got everybody downtown scared to death that you're going to pull the plug on everything. I said, well, who are you talking about? He said, well, I'm talking about the money. He said, they're scared to death you're going to pull the plug on everything and they're making me run. I said, well, you say you don't want to be the mayor? I do. He said, well, I don't even have time for it. I said, well, look, I wish you would. He says, too late, I've already announced. But the fact of the matter is Eddie Deloach never wanted to be the mayor of Savannah, Georgia. He didn't like the job. He didn't enjoy the job. And if you ever saw him sit through a city council meeting, it was excruciating for him. But the bottom line is, John, he was pushed into it at the last minute because I had Edna Jackson beat and the power downtown was scared to death that I was going to be anti-tourism, anti-arena. They did not like the fact that I was calling for a new city manager and a new police chief, and that I dared suggest that we should take a good, long, hard look at the police department and infrastructure. Now, Mr. McMasters, I will remind you, sir, 6 years later, that in Savannah, Georgia, we still need a city manager. We still need a police chief. We still need infrastructure. And the last thing we need is the only thing we're getting, and that's a new arena.
Wow.
So we have not come very far in 6 years, as far as I'm concerned. Call it sour grapes, call it whatever you want, but I'm just here to tell you, we have not come very far since I ran for mayor in 2015.
Okay. Let me add something similar to that. In that seminal Jim Maricas Connect interview with you in 2015 in Connect,
Yeah.
You said, quote, I think if people knew who was contributing to campaigns, then the public would understand who is actually running this town.
Yeah.
So, Murray, in 2019, this election after yours, Chelsea Beck and Michelle Solomon did a lot of work to open source the contributions for everyone to share. Better Savannah shared a whole bunch. We particularly focused on Richard Kessler's, okay?
Right.
And every incumbent got voted out of office with the exception of the two. Do you think that transparency and that sharing of who is giving to who in a major way, as opposed to you got to go FOIA it and find it, helped us?
Well, I think it's driven some of the main contributors underground. The main contributors behind Eddie Deloach were never known to the public because, first of all, in addition to cash, they were giving him other things such as they were paying for electronic billboards. That doesn't show up on your campaign statement. In Savannah, Georgia, you know, if these filings, nobody reads them anyhow, John. And the only time you ever get, as you know, the only time you get into trouble is if you don't file and your opponent makes political hay out of it. But the only thing that I think has happened is that it's forced contributors to go dark.
Well, to a certain extent, just like Better Savannah is an independent political expenditure committee, I think perhaps what you're seeing is the people that paid for that billboard for Eddie was a PAC. I know Steve Green's got a PAC, and that sort of stuff is one way to obfuscate and avoid direct campaign disclosure and do it in an indirect way. Let me ask you another question. In that 2015 Connect interview, you said, quote, "If the media did a better job of investigating and reporting the news, I'd probably win this election. The problem is that much of what goes on isn't reported in the Savannah Morning News." Murray, the Savannah Morning News has imploded. The Savannah Business Journal is mostly advertorial. Connect Savannah has morphed into some conservative mess. And Jim Marinkas is off on a promising new project called the Savannian. What's your take? Has the media changed sufficiently? Where are we and where's it going?
I've never seen it this bad in all of my life. I don't read the Savannah Morning News anymore because there isn't any reason to. The last investigative reporter that they hired was Leslie Kahn. And Leslie Kahn left the paper because they didn't want to pay her and they didn't want to publish the stuff she had found out. I took Leslie Kahn out to lunch just to thank her after she left the newspaper. And I'll never forget this, John. I asked her, I said, "Leslie, what were you working on your way out the door?" And she said to me, "Murray, I was getting ready to drop a huge story on Willie Lovett." Now, this was 2 years before the Willie Lovett saga began to break. Leslie Kahn was sitting on a story that would have blown that open 2 years earlier, and she said the newspaper killed it. Wow. So even if you were an investigative reporter at the paper, they weren't going to publish your findings. So that is what has killed the media in Savannah, Georgia. We don't have investigative reporters. The ones who are here are not allowed to do their jobs, and they aren't paid well to do it in the first place. So why would they want to run the risk of angering very powerful people with exposés under these conditions? So here's the point, John. What this all leads to is this, and what Savannah should be concerned about, is that right now in America, whether it's Savannah, Georgia, Washington, D.C., it's all about information and who controls it. And where do you have to go to get it? And that source, how pure is it? And as I see right now, look, you're talking to a man who does not own a television. I don't own a television because it's a lot of noise, and there's nothing on there of value to me. I don't read the newspaper. I don't watch television. If I want to know something, Mr. McMasters, I go to the source and I ask them directly. I don't want it through a filter. I don't want it from because I don't trust the media anymore. And look, it's got nothing to do with the Trump election and all that business. I got rid of my TV 15 years ago. So the point is that there is no such thing as investigative reporters in Savannah. And that's why Savannah does not know the truth of what goes on downtown under the Gold Dome. There's no one to hold them accountable. There's nobody watching, and we all suffer for it.
Have to agree with you. Have to agree with you there. It's a strange thing for a city of this size to have so little investigative journalism. Let me ask you a question. You've lived in Ardsley Park for how long?
My family has owned the house that I live in since it was built in the 1940s.
Wow.
My family has lived in Savannah 7 generations. We go back to the 1840s. So we're from here. I was born here, raised here. My father moved us to Atlanta in 1966 when he became the general counsel of the Georgia Department of Labor and later counsel to Martin Luther King. So that's what took us to Atlanta and kept us there a long time. And I did not get back here until 1998.
Okay, well, my sensibility is that Ardsley Park is experiencing a lot of crime.
Yes.
Car break-ins, robberies up in Havertz
Yes.
Village,
Yes.
shots fired all the time.
Yes.
What's why, Murray? Is this just a blip, or it's just going to be the new normal?
Not if you take the time to read the HR complaint that was filed against the chief last year and signed by 77 officers. And there would have been many more signing that had they not stopped them from signing anymore. But that HR complaint lays out what's going on with our police department. Naturally, the media hasn't said 2 words about it. But in that complaint, it describes a department in disarray from the top down, run by a tyrant, surrounded by yes men. And the problem is that the chief, although he fits the image, he's not a cop. And by that, I mean, the old guard cops on that police force will tell you that he has killed aggressive policing. He took the tactical team and turned them into warrant chasers. And the chain of command changes on a monthly basis. Competent people have been replaced with incompetent cronies. And there's only one old guard officer still left on the force, and that's Captain Gundage. All of the other old guard guys are gone, or they're just waiting out their time to collect their pension. But the thing is that the chief doesn't even get along with his majors. So the thing that concerns me, and if you read, now this isn't coming from me. This is not coming, this is coming directly from the HR complaint, that the numbers are cooked to make it look like we have a full police force, when in fact we are about 150 officers light. The recruits receive no proactive training. They're instructed to sit and wait on the call. You've got ministers and media making policy. And so consequently, property crime has gone through the roof simply because this town is not safe. And if you look at the crime stats, we've got multiple shootings daily, which don't make it to the news. There was back in December, there was a string of 5 home invasions in my neighborhood. 5 home invasions on 65th Street, and never made the media. And it was done brazenly, openly, in broad daylight, because the criminal element in this town knows that there's no more jump out units in this town. So the word is out, and C&T is imploding. And so we are heading to a point now, if you ask the police, John, and they will tell you that we are heading to a point now to where private security is going to explode in this part of the world. That every gated community is going to have its own security, and the communities that aren't gated are going to be. And that's what you can expect in Savannah in the days ahead, because there's not going to be any fix to the Savannah Police Department. It's been broken like this for years. I don't see any attempt to fix it. And that comes from the police. That doesn't come from, once again, does not come from me. That comes from the officers on the line. So that's where we are.
But Murray, I didn't mean to suggest that this increase in crime and robbery is unique to Ardsley Park. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I'm sure it's up all across the city. 2018 homicides citywide were up 33% in the first year of this council, which is a terrible way to get started. One thing that caught my attention in that 2015 Connect interview with you, Murray, and that is, you said the ratio we use to staff our police department is woefully outdated. There should be 3 officers per 1,000 in a metropolitan area. We don't count our visitors, SCAD students, or homeless, which, incredibly bump the numbers up. So we've championed that position. Nobody wants to go to the chamber and say, well, you account for 20 to 30,000 people a day, but you don't pay anything for police. You still convinced that we're just fooling ourselves with not taking the real population into account when we do public safety?
Well, look, you don't have to ask me. You can ask the officers past and present, and they will tell you. When I was running for mayor, it was interesting. If you run for office in Savannah, Georgia, you would be surprised who comes to you and tells you what. And one of the very first things that happened was that there were some police officers who came to me and said, look, we'll tell you everything that we want you to tell the public, and we will support you, and we will help you get elected. And these are things that we cannot say. We would lose our jobs. We're not allowed to say these things, but these are things that Savannah should know. And so for a solid year, I ran around Savannah telling the public what their police department wanted them to know. And an interesting thing happened on the way to the polls, John. I did not get the endorsement from the police unions that was promised me, because at the last minute they came to me and they said, look, we're not convinced that you can win. And if you don't win, they'll be held to pay with Edna Jackson. So we're not going to endorse you, and we're not going to endorse her. We're not going to endorse anybody.
Gotcha.
And so I said, well, if you don't endorse me, I'm not going to win. And they said, well, we're all going to vote for you and our families and our friends. I said, well, no, if you're not going to stand behind me after I've stood behind you, I have no chance. And they did not endorse me. They didn't endorse Edna either. But that's Savannah, Georgia for you, John. Your police department can't be honest with the public. They've got to find a mouthpiece like Murray Silver to tell the public what it needs to know, because the media is not going to tell you. And there you are. Now, what happened in the end, John? Half of Savannah, Georgia hated my guts for daring to tell them the truth. To this day, there are people I don't know who wish horrible things on me simply because I stood up and said, you know what? Things are not so good at the police department, and we should do something about it.
Well, Murray, you certainly have our respect and admiration for your candidacy, your straight talk, your truth, your unvarnished willingness to call it like it is. And I wish you would have won, man. I voted for you, and everybody I could tell to vote hopefully voted for you. Let me ask you a question. In 14 months of this new council, the current mayor, Van Johnson, has independently launched 11 different task forces. Some of these task forces, Murray, have over 30 plus people assigned to them. We're almost doing a task force a month.
Right.
Is there a strategy here, or are we just trying to make people think we're concerned and working hard? Or Have task forces, have you ever seen them work out well? And certainly in this volume.
John, that's stressing, but let me throw something in that'll blow your mind. When I was talking to Sergeant Arango about the police department, he said that, you know, the every so often you'll pick up the paper and you'll see that some task force, some federal agency has come to town and arrested a whole bunch of people in some big sweep. He said, and that's to handle the spikes in crime. The Savannah police don't do it. They call in the ATF, they call in the big boys. The feds come down here and they do it. And the interesting thing is that Arango says that what this means is that the Savannah Police Department is death by task force. If you have to call in a task force to do what an agency is supposed to do, it is an admission that they're not doing it. So if the mayor can only get things done by forming task forces, it's an admission that your city government is failing their job.
Gotcha. Interesting point. Chuck, you're back with us.
I'm back. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. Good to hear you. What do you
think? Fascinating, beginning to the conversation, and I think it's apologies for our technical difficulties to get on live late tonight. I'm really fascinated by this question about the task forces. This criticism about the task forces is coming from all directions. And, if I pointed out to you, John, a few days ago, that if you look at what the task forces are, they mirror the caucus structure within the Democratic Party, right? There's a caucus, there's a Black caucus, there's a LGBT caucus, there's an accessibility, a disability caucus, there's a veterans caucus. It's to me, unless something substantive in policy, in terms of policy changes, come out of these task forces, it essentially just looks like a re-election effort from City Hall on day one. One thing again, I'm fascinated with that conversation. We can talk some more about that if you want, but the question I want to start gearing us towards is that the first question John asked you is, what happened in 2019? And I want to take you, John, back to that night in November of 2019. In that span of 3 or 4 hours, we had thought we had just changed the entire arc of the change of Savannah. Sure. From the surface on November 3rd, 2019, it looked like we had sent 9 Democrats, 7 or 8 progressives, and we were going to get some real change out of this city hall. So what do you think happened between November 3rd and now over the last 15, 16 months? Because as we've seen, and you've seen, we have a crystallized 5-4 majority. Right. It's very crystallized. Right. There's one side of the aisle and there's another. You've got Van leading the majority. You've got Keisha leading the minority, on the surface. What are your thoughts, Murray?
Well, one of the biggest problems is that we don't have a city manager. So that's the most powerful person in the town. All of the department heads report to the city manager. You don't have one. You don't have, and you got to remember that if you look at the last 20 years, at the 3 predecessors to St. Michael, God love him, to be city manager in Savannah, Georgia has got to be an extremely frustrating job, in that it's impossible to do it. This city council uses them as a scapegoat, and at the same time makes it impossible for them to do their job. The problem that we have in Savannah right now is you just had spent a year and a lot of our taxpayer dollars to find great candidates that weren't hired. And now we've got to go through the process again. So you're now at least another year out before you're going to see a city manager. And who of talent and ability wants to come to Savannah, Georgia to manage this town when you look back over the last 20 years of what's happened to city managers? So as I see it, the problem is you've got a city council and a mayor that are elected, and they don't do the job that we elect them to do because they foist it off on a city manager that we don't have. To me, that's where the problem begins and that's where it ends. It was the same problem we had in 2015. We needed to replace a city manager who was not up to the job. We haven't had one since, with the exception again of Mr. Brown. So in my opinion, sir, and you guys probably know more about this than I do, but in my opinion, it begins and ends with the failure of city manager.
Well, let me remind you, Murray, of a conversation I think you and I had probably in March or early April. And you said, John, your team's breaking up. They're defecting. They don't want to hear from you. They got their own ideas now. And nice job, but you're out of the loop. Do you remember that conversation?
I'm surprised that you would own up to it, but yes, I do remember it, John.
Well, it was hard to hear at the time, Murray, but you are incredibly prescient and unvarnished, and I appreciate what you said, and I can say unequivocally, you were absolutely correct.
You know something, John? There were among those same people that we're talking about. There were people that I had run with and considered to be friends and family who, after they won this election, I haven't heard from since. And these were people that I used to speak to multiple times daily. And they were calling me to ask me my opinion, asking for names or phone numbers and historical facts and events. And I thought we had real relationships. And I endeavored to help them in their campaigns. And the stunning thing to me, John, is that as soon as they got elected, even if I tried, there was a couple of times when I needed a personal favor, and the only person who responded to me was Nick Palumbo. And let me tell you something, he responded in a big way, and I publicly thanked him on Facebook for what he did for me. But as for some of my other really good friends, I haven't heard word one from them, and that concerns me. It was as if to say, you know, we got it. We don't need you anymore. We can take it from here, and God bless them.
Well, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes in politics from a friend of the committee, former state senator Regina Thomas, who often would remind me, John and Murray, that in politics, there are no such things as permanent friends, and there are no such thing as permanent enemies. And I think we've learned that lesson the hard way at the city. I think in 2020, during the COVID primaries, you know, we kind of learned that lesson and pulled back a little bit, did not endorse everywhere. You know, we are really looking to hone in and get people documented on video from here on out about what policies they support, and more importantly, what they're going to do about it. You know, I mean, I heard from one of the aldermen today on Facebook, you know, whom I reminded that we're in year 2 and none of these policies have been done yet. And he, you know, very much wanted to make a point that I support all of what you're saying. But it's not on the agenda. It's not on the agenda. There's no votes coming up. But I support what you're trying to do, you know, and I'm wondering, you know, where does the patience run thin with voters as somebody who's been here a lot longer than I have? You know, where do you think the patience is running thin?
Well, I'll tell you, interestingly, one of the topics that I ran on and got a pledge from every single challenger in this last election was term limits for aldermen. Term limits. And every one of them signed up, said, yes, term limits. Term limits. That's how we get rid of the problem kinds of people that were on city council in recent years. Term limits. Ask every single alderman today where they are on term limits. See, they'll tell you, oh, that's off the board. No, that's off the table. Oh, and by the we can't do anything about it. And that's going to come from Atlanta, and we're not going to. I said, no, wait a minute. I said, no, that's off the table. I said, okay, that's just one example. They were all campaigning on term limits. They all pledged term limits. What happened to term? Gone.
Well, Murray, you've called it smoke and mirrors. as far back as 2000. John, you called it kabuki theater, because all of us on this call know that if we go, I mean, you can see this Derek Malo in the newspaper the other day. State Representative Derek Malo, House District 163, direct quote about the gambling issue. I need to hear from the city of Savannah. It would be great if they would pass a resolution up or down on this, right? You know, and so when they use this excuse, well, that's something to do with the charter and the state. No, the delegation listens to you, right? If you pass a resolution that says we want our charter changed to have 2 terms or 3 terms, term limits for all aldermen, what do you think the delegation is going to do? They're going to ignore it? And then they have to answer to the voters in 18 months, 15 months? I don't think so. But they play this smoke and mirrors game where, oh, the city blames the state, and the state blames the city, and then somebody blames the school board, and oh, the county commission did this. You know, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You don't really know which person's at fault, who's responsible here. Okay, we can all get seats at the table, but if we don't know who's at the head and making decisions, it doesn't really matter. Go ahead, Murray.
Well, that gets back to the earlier point that one of the key players that's missing that keeps this theater from operating more smoothly is you don't have a city manager in place who's always been the council scapegoat. And until you get that person, then it's going to be almost impossible for the city council to do anything, because then they don't agree on anything to begin with. And now you don't even have a Michael Brown to be the referee in the sandbox. So, I mean, as far as I can tell, I don't expect anything out of the city council for the next 3 years. I don't expect anything out of them except an arena that we don't need.
So taking into account of COVID, how do you think that, following this discussion of casino, how do you think that COVID really affects our culture here in Savannah?
Dear, I'll tell you something. I'm a big picture kind of guy. And by that, I mean, I was trained as a photographer, as a lawyer, and as a writer, especially biography. I'm a big picture kind of guy. I'm not big on details. My job was always to get the big picture in focus. And I'll tell you what I see. In the first year, we managed to destroy custom, tradition, history, and habit in an effort to erase differences between people. But in the second year, what we have seen is that it is now destroying spirit and desire. That's a big picture thing. When you ask what COVID has done to Savannah, this is what I see. You know, so many of my friends, the people that I do speak to on a daily basis, are having an existential crisis. They don't know what to do in an effort to make themselves over. For the past year, they haven't been able to go to work, to church, to school, to restaurants, to bars, to sporting events. They can't travel. You know, I'll tell you something, and it's painful for me to say this, and I certainly don't want people to think that I'm doing this for sympathy. I have not seen my wife in 15 months. My wife is Brazilian. She was forced to go back home to take care of her dying parents and run the family business that she will inherit. My wife is in late stages of leukemia, and she is now taking the very last protocol that you can take that's available to failing chemo patients. I can't get to Brazil. She cannot get here. I have not seen her except for 14 days out of the past 15 months. Now,
Wow.
I am an empath, and I'm surrounded by sick and dying people. And the fact of the matter is, as I go around this town, I see people who are either sick and dying, or they're sick in spirit and they're dying. And the thing that's what concerns me about this COVID thing. That's what concerns me.
So Murray, I want to relate your metaphor to Savannah, because there's a lot of people here who would say that Savannah is sick and dying. And if there's one thing about a human body when it's sick and dying, it's that part of it does fight back. Okay. And this is very evident with the advent of new generation of leadership on council in the opposition. You know, a lot of people have short memories here. They seem to forget there was a time when Mayor Edna Jackson kept Van Johnson in the minority, right? There was a time when Eddie Deloach kept Van Johnson in the minority. And this guy has gotten there, this mayor has gotten there and talks about seats at the table, and yet is leading the most divided council because you have these 4 Black women who have lived, they're all born and raised here, right? All of them are between the ages of, you know, late 40s to early 60s. So these are grown, educated, experienced Savannah women,
Local.
right? Who have seen the worst of the worst here. You know, you talk about the faith crisis of Interfaith Hospitality Network, the Rape Crisis Center with Keisha. You talk about the Longshoremen with Alicia Miller Blakely. You talk about the Greater West Side with Bernetta Lanier, you know, and Estella Shabazz. And these women are getting labeled as if they're just troublemakers, kind of like you were, right? What do you think it's important for communities, especially like ours, white, affluent, liberal, whatever you want to call us, that maybe aren't connected to the networks they are? And if you just were to pick up the paper or watch the local, you know, you'd think these women are just an opposition caucus, you know, of rabble rousers. But that doesn't really seem to be the case beneath the surface, does it?
Well, if it was me, in a perfect world, not only would you have term limits, but you would redraw the district lines in Savannah, Georgia, and knock 8 down to 4. I don't see the need for having 8 people on council. The different parts of the city are not so different that you've got to have representation in the form that we have it now. And part of the problem is that, as we have seen, the structure of council and the city manager form of government has created these problems that no matter who you elect, they seem to inherit a dynamic that is bigger than them. And it's odd. As soon as they get the job, all of a sudden, the job starts telling them how to act and how to comport themselves. And all of a sudden, friends turn into strangers. So in my opinion, you would start by looking at the fact that this city needs to overhaul its government in more ways than one.
Do you think that includes a strong mayor system of government?
I think we get rid of the city manager because it doesn't work in Savannah, Georgia. Unless you have a Don Mendonça or a Michael. Let me tell you, it doesn't work here. It doesn't work here. And if you ask Rob Hernandez, he will tell you he wasn't allowed to do his job. No sooner than he got it, he was applying in other towns because he wanted to get the hell out of here. He saw from the jump. As soon as he got the job, he said, this is going to be impossible. And as he said, what he couldn't brook was the fact that people were threatening him and his family. So no, listen, I think we need to take a long, hard look at this. A lot of people argue with me, say, no, city managers want. I think you get rid, and I think that you hold the mayor and city council accountable. You elected them; they should be held accountable. They should do the jobs.
Let me make a point, and this goes to 35 years of council manager form of government, and this goes to every sitting council, current and past. We've had 2 to 3 decades of economic growth and prosperity. You can't open up a daily copy of the Savannah Morning News and not see record-breaking port business, record-breaking tourism, Michael Thoma's rosy economic growth projections. And yet, I've been here 27 years, Murray. The poverty level today in this city, and obviously I'm not part of that equation, but I care about that. Today, it's no different than it was 27 years ago. when Columbus landed, okay? And yet everyone talks about how accomplished their regime or their council has been. Yet these are the same people that say, oh, put bigger expectations on CETA. We can't do that. That's CETA. Or Georgia Port Authority. Oh, well, you know, we just have to suck it up. We can't.
You should just be thankful for the jobs,
Yeah.
the few jobs that are here from it.
And it's the same thing with Savannah College of Art and Design. I mean, close to 100 buildings they own now, off the digest. Let me be rhetorical. Where does it end? Are we going to let them have 150 buildings, 200 buildings, 250 buildings? There has to be some.
Let me ask it a more specific way. Murray, why don't you think Savannah understands the economic principle of diminishing returns, right? You make a policy, you let SCAD start buying up downtown so it beautifies and changes. So that makes sense in 1978, right? You were here, right? It makes sense in 1988, right? Still pretty bad downtown. Probably made sense in 1998. Even in 2008, might have still made sense. But let me tell you, by 2018, it no longer made sense. We had passed that point of diminishing returns where the more property SCAD gets, the less beneficial it is to the broader city. The same thing is true with the port, right? So in 1995, former mayor who was on the county commission, Eddie Deloach, along with Burke Day and Regina and Thomas, a whole bunch of people, they phased out the port container fees to make the port competitive, right? That was the policy goal. So in 1995, that makes sense, right? Right? In 2005, probably still made sense. But let's be honest here, since 2015, especially with the federal money that's been approved and is flowing to the expansion, it doesn't really make sense anymore. I mean, how much threat to our water supply? How many more kids have to die in trucking accidents here? Right? I know it's great for the attorneys, but let's be real. We're talking about the broader implications of policy. So why don't you give me your feedback on why Savannah doesn't understand that economic principle?
Well, it is a problem that is unique to historic cities. This is a city that is frozen in time, and it is done so to preserve history for the tourist. But this has a very chilling effect, because not only do you keep the historic district intact, but when you go to the east side and west side where there are poor families who are living in the same conditions of their great-great-grandparents and haven't changed at all, this is what happens to a city. It is frozen in time. And consequently, as long as tourism is the god, as long as that is the golden fleece, this is the problem. There isn't any balance. SCAD, from what I understand, from what I'm told, it's too late to do anything about SCAD. You can't stop them. It's a beast that can't be fed. They have turned into a holding company for real estate. They're not an art school anymore. When they just bought the Chatham Apartments for a couple $1 million more than the previous buyer who'd only bought it a few months before.
No, I mean, let's talk about that, right? Because what happened is you had an Atlanta real estate investment company come in and buy it and then flip it for 10 million more to SCAD, right? You know, like, you can't tell me that that's not a loop-de-doop, right? You know, you can't tell me that that's not Paula calls somebody in Atlanta and they call another friend, say, hey, do you want to make 10 million on 25 million investment over a year? Right? I mean, I do, you know, it's a good rate of return, right? You go hold that money, you kick all the black people out who've been living there off the park for 25, 30 years. You take the bad PR, and then SCAD comes in after you're done and they don't have to deal with it. Well, $10 million well spent for them in PR, right? But nobody wants to frame the issue like you would, right? And like we might. You know, who's going
to stop them? Who?
An ambitious attorney from the state or the feds. I mean, it's the only way, probably, is the courts.
How can you in a town where the city attorney comes from the biggest law firm in town? I mean, you know, look,
whose father started the biggest engineering firm in town.
Guys, we are not anti-SCAD. Let's be clear.
Correct.
All we're asking is this: is it reasonable at this late stage for SCAD to become a partner to help defer the cost of all the services that they enjoy from both the city and the county, and become a real neighbor instead of an absentee neighbor?
But SCAD has gone on the record time and time again to say that they don't exist for Savannah. SCAD doesn't exist for Savannah. SCAD exists for SCAD.
Murray, they can say whatever they want, but the reality, the objective reality is they're spread all across the historic district, 50, 60, 70 buildings in the historic district, and they're not paying any property taxes. And their buses are rolling over our streets, creating potholes and divots and whatnot, air pollution, carbon footprint. City wants to reduce carbon footprint. Good luck with SCAD. I'm just saying the average reasonable person in this city across all spectrums would not argue today that it is high time that SCAD start contributing a little bit for all the services they receive, because they have grown so large. Again, where does it end? Do we just cede half of downtown to SCAD and make them incorporated in their own city?
It's already, they have more than 100 buildings. It's too late. What you suggest, I mean, you can't put a stop to it. It's too late. It is what it is. The question is, to what end, and when is enough for them? And what is the purpose of them continuing to acquire all of these buildings? I mean, what is the purpose? There should, at least before they are allowed to close on some of these buildings, they should be at least have to explain what the stated purpose is.
Right.
And
Let's
so-
talk about, so on Montgomery and 38th Street, right? You've got the old prep school building, right? Purchased
Right.
4 years ago with the promise that this is going to revitalize this Lower West Side community,
Make a huge
right down the block from the Gulfstream Design Building. And it's been sitting there like an eyesore for 4 years, right? How can they not pay taxes on a property that is being used for nothing, right? I mean, again, we're talking about, we're taxing black heirs of property who don't even know that they have a property to upkeep in West Savannah with a blight tax, right? But SCAD can't even pay a dime on a blighted piece of property.
An entire block,
An entire trust lot, I mean, huge lot, corner lot, on a huge intersected, street. So I agree that, again, we're not anti-SCAD here. We're just pointing out that they are to a point in size and scope where, we need them to be a bigger partner with us. What does that look like? I mean, how much PR would they get by just coming to the city and the county and the school board and said, look, we understand that we are taking property off the tax rolls and it hurts. So for the next 5 years, we're going to give each of your taxing authorities, $1 million a year. That's $3 million. I refuse to believe that impacts SCAD's business model. And if it does, I'm not really sure they should be in that business.
Well, Chuck, let me say this. I think that right now, other than this venue here that you've created, this is probably the only place in town where this is being discussed openly. Now, I will tell you what, you will hear it come up again publicly around the time that the city has to raise taxes, because they're running at a shortfall right now. I don't see how we get through the next 3 years under these conditions without the city raising taxes. And at that point, we're going to have to talk about SCAD again, because property taxes will go up because they pay none. And you will maybe publicly hear this discussion. But right now, I would suggest to you, sir, that this is the only place in Savannah, Georgia, where you can hear people thoughtfully discuss SCAD and the situation in Savannah.
Carrie, what did you want to
Murray?
ask?
So I have a question. So we've talked about policy, we talked about power structures, we talked about different power groups. It seems as if Savannah is outgrowing our current system. and there's all these different groups. So if we connected some dots, first of all, what would a future government system in Savannah look like? And second of all, what is a policy that can unite these different groups in Savannah?
Well, as far as I can tell right now, there's about 12 different camps in this city. But what we do not have in Savannah is leadership. We don't have a person of vision who says, this is where I see us going, and this is how we're going to get there. And that is someone that people can follow. I don't see any leadership anywhere. Even worse is that our dear friend Tom Kohler is now formally retired. So the old guard, the movers, the shakers, the thinkers among us, the people who were carrying the torch up to this point, they put it down and nobody's picked it up. I look around town at Julius Hall, at Coco Pappy, at Clinton Edminster. I look at Jolene Byrne and her husband Ned. I look at Jay Jones. I look at Keisha. I look at You Better Savannah. I look at another group called Taking Action. Then you've got the Alicia Blakeleys in this town, and then you got Van Johnson. So, I mean, you've got 9, 10 camps. They don't really talk to each other. And yet no one has really emerged as a leader in this town. And if you haven't asked me, but I'm willing to predict that Van Johnson is not going to run for re-election. I believe that he's going to end up in Washington. I think he's going to get appointed. And I think that it was clear that when Kamala Harris came to town and Cuomo came to town, it was for a reason. And I think that Van Johnson is on the radar screen in Washington. And I expect that he's going to be leaving us to go somewhere, because right now he doesn't have a political future in Savannah, Georgia, other than another term. And why the hell would he want to be mayor again in Savannah, Georgia under these conditions? So to answer your question, those are the people I've identified, and God love them, because I think that what we need now is to pass the torch from the Tom Kohlers to the Coco Pappies and the Clinton Edminsters. I think they're going to need a little guidance and a little help. But the thing is that I believe now, since COVID pushed the giant reset button, let's take advantage of it, okay? Let's take it. Let's finish the job COVID started. We have broken tradition, history, custom, and habit. Let's form new ones. Let's bring in new people. Let's bring in the next generation. Let's help them do what they want to do and stop telling them what they can do. That, to me, is the future of Savannah, Georgia.
Well,
Prove to me I'm wrong.
I want to respond. Pam Miller, thank you first off for joining us live and commenting on the stream. You posted that each of these camps has its own direction. And I think that's an extremely good point as of today. But I want to take everybody back to fall of 2019. Remember, in 2019, Savannah was united against that Eddie Deloach council. Why? Because Eddie Deloach overplayed his hand for 4 years. John, you famously put it that, Edna Jackson was never boldly and proudly of how pro-business she was. She just did what needed to be done and never bragged about it and just worked in the community, right? Where Eddie Deloach came in and we are going to bond out $250 million for this downtown, and we're going to support this business, and that's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. And that overplaying of that hand resulted in 7 incumbents losing. And again, I would have thought we would have had substantive change by now. And we've got this rock solid line. And I agree with what you just said, Murray. We need to pass the torch to Carrie and I's generation. Generation X, the millennial generation, needs to take over. But in these generations, I often find in Savannah, there are 2 types of those who are involved in politics in Carrie and I's generation. There are those that are looking to inherit the system, and there are those that are fundamentally looking to challenge it or change it. And the ones who in the latter camp tend to get pushed out to, platforms like ours, because we're independent, and don't get the inside track to become the next generation of leadership here unless they play the game. What are your words of advice to people in our generation looking to change this place?
it's a small town. There's not enough money or spotlight to go around. So Savannahans historically have had to take it from each other. I will tell you something really funny. It is not intended to embarrass Meg Heap, but I'm going to tell you anyhow. When I was running for mayor of Savannah, Georgia, and I was talking about the construction mafia that was knocking this town dead, Meg Heap called me into her office one day, and she got out her pencil and her pad, and she opened up the book, and she said, okay, what is this construction mafia you're talking about? What do I need to know? I said, Meg, put your pen down, close your book. She said, why? I said, because your campaign accepted money from them when you ran for office. She said, what? I said, Meg, Dave Simons brought you substantial sums of money when you were running for district attorney. Did you bother to ask him where the money came from? I said, it's coming from the construction mafia, Meg. And she put down her pen and she closed her book and she said, well, Murray, what else have you got to talk about? The point that I'm making to you, sir, is that oftentimes people find themselves in the pocket of the people who really run this town and aren't even aware of it. That's how small this town is. That's how big the money is. It only comes from a couple of sources. I'll never forget. Coco Pappy does not speak to me to this day because I ran into her in the grocery store once and said to her, Coco dear, why did you accept a grant from CETA? She looked at me, she said, well, what's wrong with that? I said, well, if you don't know what's wrong with that, dear, that's the problem.
Well, it was created.
And so,
right.
So in this town, the problem is there just isn't enough money to go around, and everybody finds themselves feeding at the same trough.
Yeah. Let me walk back just a minute here to the comments about the various groups you're citing. With ATR, All Things Relative, Julius Hall, and his effort as a candidate consultant, as well as an imaging narrative control effort, we're not far apart, and we're actually talking. I was a guest on Keisha's show Monday night. We hope to be able to collaborate more in the future, but that sort of, let's not lose sight of the fact that we're all trying to achieve something that's very similar. It's not dissimilar. We want the same things. And the more they keep us apart and divided, the less effective we can be. So there is some promise and some beta.
John, will you read Murray those numbers of voters from the other day? I know it's on your desk over here somewhere, right?
Yeah.
I want you to read to our audience the number of votes on November 3rd for the 1st district, the 5th district, and the 2 at-large alderwomen, and then read us the number of votes for the 2nd district, the 3rd district, the 4th district, the 6th district, and the mayor.
I got him.
Yeah.
Okay, in the 2019 city elections, on Van's side, Dietrich Leggett got 2,008 votes. Linda Wilder Bryan got 2,235. Nick Palumbo got 4,057. Curtis Purty got 2,529, and Van Johnson got 14,888. Write this number down. The majority on council right now got a total of 25,717 votes. Okay, 25717. Now, the minority interest on council right now got the following. Estella Shabazz got 3,030 votes. Alicia Blakely got 13,642 votes. Keisha Gibson Carter got 11,569 votes, and Bernetta Lanier got 2,627 votes. Their total, Murray, is 30,868 votes. Essentially, and not even essentially, mathematically, what we have is a 17% voter approval endorsement mandate going to the 4 women that can't get a freaking thing on the agenda, because these other side that got far fewer votes says, we're going to stand with the mayor, and you can't bring anything up unless we allow it. That's just FUBAR in the ultimate sense of the word. Is that what you wanted, Chuck? Were those numbers?
Yeah, those numbers, and I think people can go to it's All Things Relevant Media, ATR, on Facebook, and you can see the Candidly Keisha show from Monday. And there's a stretch where John McMaster goes through 10 or 11 comparable cities in Georgia, between 70 and 100 something thousand people, like Savannah, city council manager form of government.
Just like us. And was it 99%? Only one of them was like that, John? It was basically 99% of them. Any single member can put something on the agenda, and if they can get a second, they can force a vote on it, right? Well, in Savannah now, under Van Johnson, the first time this rules has been like this. I mean, this is a different rule set than Eddie and Edna and Mayor Johnson, Otis Johnson. This is a new rule set for this specific council, that just to get something on the agenda, to get it debated and voted on, you now have to have 5 council members support it, unless you just have the mayor's support, right? And so, again, I don't want to call names, but, to me, Van Johnson, being the successful, skilled politician he is over the 20 years he's been there, essentially has Mitch McConnell, the Savannah City Council. And what I mean by that, what I mean by that is, we all know the legendary tactics that Mitch McConnell uses in the U.S. Senate, both with which to force legislation or to block it. Same thing with nominees, all that stuff, right? And it's like Van has found a way to just protect the majority on council from having to take tough votes and freeze out this minority. I'm shocked this isn't a bigger issue in town. I see the 4 women trying to explain it out there, but I know it must be archaic and hard to explain. I mean, what do you think about that? Because that, to me, this entire first year and a half of this council comes down to that April 2020 meeting where they changed the rules. I mean, the entire council can be summed up in that change. I think if you don't change that rule set, I bet you we'd have a city manager right now permanently. I think the real division on this council started from that rules package change, and it's gone downhill ever since then. What are your thoughts, Murray?
My thoughts are that so many of the things that you touched on would be improved drastically if we could adopt what I said earlier about a post-racial attitude. Race still matters far too much in this city council. It was one of the reasons why a really good white candidate was not hired to be city manager a couple of weeks ago. On present form, you won't see a white city manager. I don't care who it is. I mean, you can bring Winston Churchill back from the grave. He ain't going to be the city manager of Savannah, Georgia, on present form. And if this city does not move beyond its black white thing, then we're not going to make any progress in the largest sense of the word. And so here's the thing. I'm already looking 3 years out at the next election. Quite frankly, because I said to you, I don't expect anything out of the city council. I don't expect them to get anything done. And until the city gets back to work, and I don't know when that will be, there's not going to be a whole lot to say grace over. All these people, basically, Chuck, they were very good at getting elected. Some of them didn't even know the job until they went to the seminar that told them what it means to be an alderman, and they were surprised at what they heard. I don't see any leadership among them, with the possible exception of Keisha, who's largely been attacked. I mean, the only time you ever hear her name in a newspaper, she's being censured or she's being brought up on charges or something. This is no way to run a city. And if black people can't get along with each other, forget about getting along with white people. But as far as I'm concerned, Savannah better learn to be a city too busy to hate, or none of the stuff we're talking about is going to matter.
I got a question. So if you were giving recommendations to any of the individuals that you just listed or referenced, what would be some alternative avenues for them to gain access to resources or to work around the issues blocking them at the current moment?
Talk to the other side. Start a dialogue. Open up. Break down inherent barriers. Be open-minded. Understand that a progressive policy is progressive policy. Doesn't matter what party you belong to, what church you go to, or anything else. It's the common DNA of good government. I will say the metaphor for me for the rules package is the December or the November 2019 election was a revolution, and basically the mayor took a knife and slashed the tires of the revolution in April with the rules package. So listen, I know it's getting late and our battery sources may be getting a little weak, so let's wrap this up. And
Murray, why don't you give us some conclusion thoughts here, and then I'll wrap up with some housekeeping, John.
Yeah, and ask Murray if he'll come back another.
My great fear, gentlemen, and I don't mind putting it out here, is that the few people of real talent that emerge on the scene locally, politically, are not going to stay here. And that includes Nick Palumbo. Nick Palumbo is already looking at Atlanta. Nick Palumbo is not from here. Nick Palumbo is not going to stay here. I think he's already had a belly full of this. The guy is really sharp. The guy's very, very good at what he does. The fascinating thing about Nick was when he was running, he had a high degree of involvement on Facebook, and he had a lot of people. He had a lot of people supporting him, and he ran unopposed and bright star. Since then, when he goes online, there's usually nobody home, and I feel for Nick. I think that tacitly rubber stamping everything Van Johnson does is probably not the best tack, but this is a man who manages upward, and he's going to manage upward beyond Van Johnson towards Atlanta. And we're going to continue to lose bright political people in the same way we've lost really talented old guard cops. Every cop on the department has got an exit strategy. They're looking to get the hell out of Savannah. If you've got any brains or any money, if you're growing up in Savannah right now and you're going to college, you figure, well, I got to get the hell out of Savannah if I'm going to do what I want to do and make any money, because the town is dead in the water now. My fear is that the people we have identified as being future leaders are not going to take the deal. They're going to leave Savannah, or they're not going to replace the John McMasters and the Tom Kohlers that we have been blessed with.
Well, Murray, I can't thank you enough for joining us. We appreciate all that you've done for Savannah. We appreciate kind of your foresight into what Better Savannah is trying to do. You were doing for years before, especially on the issue of term limits. And we really do want to have you back maybe in a few months and just, have another conversation and see where we're at. But for those of you who are viewing this live, I want to thank you for joining us tonight on the Better Savannah Facebook page. Better Savannah is the Savannah and Chatham County area's leading independent expenditure political action committee focused on progressive policy outcomes here at the local level. 2021 is an off season for elections, and we are going to come to you weekly on Wednesdays with content around the policy issues we've been advocating for at the local and state governments in preparation for the next election cycles. All right. So next Wednesday, we're going to be joined by Jim Marikis, the founder and editor of The Savannian. Many of you know him as the longtime editor of Connect Savannah. We're going to get his take on what happened with the exit at Connect and what his new independent media project is. And then the week after that, we're going to have another show, probably on the top 10 things to watch for the next year for local politics and policy. If you appreciate this content, which we can see the amount of viewers, we appreciate everybody who's commenting, and you want to support what we're doing, please go to www.bettersavannah.org and click on the join or donate/membership button rather, and become a member. $7 a month goes a long way towards getting us ready for the next election season and building out this content for you guys on a weekly basis. So I really appreciate everybody joining. Before we sign off, Carrie, John, you guys got anything?
Gary?
I would just say make sure they're following us on the page, share the page, and also be checking out the website, because we're going to be adding a section where they can actually look at the calendar and see what upcoming events are coming, and they need to really mark their favorites on the website so they can keep that up and see what's coming down the pipeline.
The only thing I have to say is I greatly appreciate Murray Silver's willingness to come on and talk shop with us. That's very, very important and precious to me, and I thank you. I've always respected you. I will always continue to respect you, and you're welcome back anytime at all. We'd love to see you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Everybody on Facebook, we appreciate
Thanks,
you tuning
Chuck.
in live. We'll talk to you guys next Wednesday. Okay, John, why don't you take us out?
Okay.